A man in a tailored suit stood in the center of a marble lobby. His hand trembled as it rose to his forehead. 60 years old, steel gray hair. The kind of man whose word could move millions. But right now his eyes were red, his jaw tight, his breath shallow. Across from him stood another man, 75. Threadbare jacket hanging loose on bony shoulders, boots worn through at the heel. But his back was straight, his hand steady at his temple. Two men, one salute, and between them, something no bank vault could hold. The sound of a heartbeat, pounding, fast, then faster, then a ringing, high-pitched, persistent. The kind that never stops once it starts. The kind soldiers hear long after the guns fall silent. 30 minutes earlier. The alley was narrow, cold. The kind of cold that sinks into your bones and stays. A man knelt on cracked pavement, tucking a thin blanket around another man's shoulders. The one lying down was coughing, deep, wet coughs that rattled his chest and wouldn't stop. Each breath a fight. If you believe a hero deserves respect no matter what he wears, like this video now. His name was Luther. The one kneeling was Silas. Luther's breath came in shallow gasps, his lips pale, his fingers shaking even under the blanket. An oxygen tank sat 3 feet away, empty. Silas pressed his hand to Luther's chest, felt the weak rise and fall. "Leave me, Cap," Luther whispered, his voice barely there. "You've done enough." Silas didn't move. "I'm a Sergeant Luther," he said, quietly. "Sergeants don't leave captains behind." Luther tried to smile. It came out crooked. Tired. "You still got the rank wrong," he rasped. "After 40 years. Silas looked at him. Really looked. This was the man who'd covered him during the Tet Offensive. The man who'd carried extra ammo when Silas's vest tore open. The man who'd written letters to Silas's mother when the mail couldn't get through. Brothers don't need the same blood, just the same dirt. And Luther had bled enough for both of them. Silas stood, his knees cracked, his back ached. 75 years doesn't come easy on anyone, let alone a man who'd carried a 90-pound ruck through rice paddies. But he stood. He looked across the street, a bank, all glass and steel, the kind of place that smelled like air conditioning and ambition. The kind of place that didn't look twice at men like him, but inside that bank was an account. Old, forgotten, maybe empty, didn't matter. Luther needed $800. An oxygen tank, medication, a chance. Silas had a letter in his coat pocket. 40 years old, stained, creased, sealed with something that wasn't wax. It would have to be enough. He touched the envelope through the fabric, felt the rough edge, the weight of it. Then he started walking. His boots hit the pavement, worn leather, cracked soles, the left one held together with duct tape. He crossed the street, pushed through the glass doors. The lobby opened up in front of him, marble floors, polished chrome, a chandelier overhead that probably cost more than he'd made in a year. His boots squeaked, then squelched, mud from the alley, rainwater from the gutter. He left a dark smear on the white stone with every step. People looked up, a woman in a blazer, a man in a tie. Their eyes moved from his boots to his jacket to his face. And then they looked away. But Silas kept walking. Because 40 years ago he'd made a promise. We leave no man behind. The man behind the counter noticed him first. 30 years old, pressed white shirt, navy tie with a perfect Windsor knot. The kind of man who color-coded his calendar and never missed a payment. His name was Preston. He looked up from his computer screen, saw the mud, saw the boots, saw Silas. His jaw tightened. He stood. The sound of his shoes on the marble floor was sharp, crisp, each step measured and deliberate, leather soles on polished stone. Click, click, click. Silas's boots made a different sound, soft, wet, the shuffle of worn rubber that had walked too many miles. Preston crossed the lobby in 8 strides. He didn't run. Running would have been unprofessional, but he moved with purpose. He stopped 3 feet from Silas, close enough to block the path to the teller windows, far enough to avoid contact. His cologne arrived a second later, something expensive, cedar and bergamot, the kind of scent that came in black bottles with French names. It cut through the air between them. Silas smelled like rain, like damp wool and old leather, like a man who'd walked through puddles because he didn't have cab fare. Preston smiled. Not warm, not cold, just professional. The kind of smile you give someone when you're about to deliver bad news and want them to know it's not personal. "Sir," he said. His voice was quiet, controlled. "Can I help you find something?" The question hung there. Not an offer, a warning. Silas met his eyes. "I need to speak with someone about my account," he said. Preston's smile didn't move. "Of course," he said. "May I ask which account that would be?" "Sterling and Associates." Preston blinked. Once. Then he glanced down at Silas's boots, at the mud spreading slowly across the white marble, at the frayed cuffs of his jacket. His hand moved to his pocket. He pulled out a small bottle, clear plastic, blue gel inside, hand sanitizer. He pumped it once, twice. The sharp smell of alcohol filled the space between them. He rubbed his hands together, slowly, deliberately. Right there, 3 feet from Silas's face. The sound was soft. The meaning was not. "I see," Preston said, his hands still moving, still rubbing. "And you have an appointment?" "No." "Documentation?" "I have a letter." Preston's eyes flicked to Silas's coat pocket, to the bulge where the envelope pressed against the fabric. "Sir," he said, his voice dropping half an octave. "I want to be respectful here. But Sterling and Associates maintains very specific protocols for account access, and frankly, our clientele expects a certain level of professionalism." He gestured vaguely at the lobby, at the chandeliers, at the marble, at the people in the suits pretending not to watch. "This account requires a minimum balance to remain active," he said, his tone almost apologetic. Almost. "And I'm afraid most of our account holders maintain relationships with us through regular deposits and documented income verification." The words were soft. The cut was deep. Silas stood very still. 75 years had taught him how to take a hit, how to breathe through it, how to stay standing when everything inside you wanted to burn. He looked at Preston, really looked, saw a young man who'd never missed a meal, never slept on concrete, never carried a friend's blood on his hands because the medevac couldn't land, a young man who thought a clean shirt made him better than the dirt. Silas took a breath. "My contribution," he said quietly, "is in the freedom you're standing on, son." His voice was calm, steady, not angry, just true. "I wore a uniform so you could wear that tie. I walked through mud so you could walk on marble. And I earned the right to stand here, whether you like the way I look or not." He paused. "Honor has no price tag." Preston's hands stopped moving. The sanitizer bottle hung loose in his fingers. For a moment, something flickered behind his eyes. Not shame. Not yet. but uncertainty. The kind you feel when you realize you might have miscalculated. Then it was gone. Preston straightened, adjusted his tie. "I'll need to verify your identity," he said. "And pull up the account details. That could take some time." He turned toward his desk. Not dismissed, not welcomed, just delayed. Silas watched him walk away. The clicking of those polished shoes. The confident stride of a man who'd never been told no. He stayed where he was. Because Luther didn't have time. And neither did he. Silas's eyes moved to the clock on the wall. 10 minutes had passed since he'd left Luther in that alley. 10 minutes of cold air, of shallow breathing, of waiting. He looked back at Preston. "I don't need much," he said. "Just $800. A loan. I can provide collateral." Preston's eyebrows lifted, not surprised, skeptical. "A loan," he repeated. "I see." He walked back to his desk, sat down, fingers moving across the keyboard with practiced speed. "Let me pull up the account," he said. The typing stopped. Preston leaned forward, squinted at the screen. Then he did something Silas hadn't expected. He turned the monitor, slowly, deliberately, angled it so Silas could see, so everyone in the lobby could see. The screen was bright. The numbers were clear. Account holder, Silas Grant, status, active, balance, 0.00, nothing, not even cents. Preston leaned back in his chair. "Unfortunately," he said, his voice carrying across the marble floor, "our lending policies require either proof of income or existing account activity, preferably both." Someone nearby coughed, not a sick cough. A laugh disguised as a cough. Silas heard the shuffle of feet, the whisper of fabric as people turned to look. A woman in a gray blazer leaned toward her companion, whispered something. They both smiled. Preston folded his hands on the desk. "Additionally," he continued, "collateral-based loans require an appraisal from a certified evaluator. That process typically takes 3 to 5 business days." He paused. Let that sink in. 3 to 5 business days. Luther didn't have 3 to 5 hours. Silas felt the weight in his coat pocket. The envelope. The letter. 40 years of history sealed with red grease pencil wax. He reached inside, pulled it out. The paper was yellowed, worn soft at the edges, stained with age and handling. But the seal was still intact, that rough red mark, like dried blood in the shape of a smear. Not elegant, not official, just desperate. He placed it on Preston's desk. "Keep this," Silas said. "It's worth more than your vault." Preston looked down at the envelope. His nose wrinkled. Just slightly. "Sir," he said, his tone patient, the way you talk to a child who doesn't understand. "We can't accept personal effects as collateral. Our policies require items with verifiable market value, jewelry, property deeds, investment accounts." He tapped the envelope with one finger. "A letter doesn't qualify. It's not just a letter. I'm sure it has sentimental value. It has more than that." Preston sighed, a small sound, almost sympathetic. Almost. "I understand you're in a difficult situation," he said, "but regulations exist for a reason. If I made exceptions for every emotional appeal, I'd lose my position. And frankly, this institution would lose its credibility." He pushed the envelope back across the desk, toward Silas, not roughly, not cruelly, just firmly. "I recommend visiting a community assistance program," Preston said. "Many churches offer emergency aid. There's one 3 blocks east." His voice was calm, reasonable. The kind of reasonable that sounds like compassion, but feels like a door closing. Silas didn't pick up the envelope. He looked at Preston. At this young man with his pressed shirt and his perfect tie and his belief that rules were more important than lives. "I just need $800, Silas said quietly. "For a friend, a brother, a man who served this country." Preston's expression didn't change. "I'm sympathetic to your situation," he said, "but policy is policy." Behind them, someone laughed. Not loud, not mean, just dismissive. The sound you make when something stops being tragic and starts being uncomfortable. When you want it to go away so you can get back to your day. Silas's hand rested on the desk, next to the envelope. His fingers were scarred, his knuckles thick. The hands of a man who dug foxholes and carried weight and held pressure on wounds that wouldn't stop bleeding. He looked at those hands, then at Preston's, smooth, clean, no calluses. The hands of a man who'd never had to fight for anything he didn't already own. Silas picked up the envelope, not in defeat, in preparation. Because sometimes the rules don't change until someone who wrote them walks through the door. Silas set the envelope back down on the desk, gently, deliberately, right in the center, between the keyboard and the nameplate that read, "Preston Hayes, Account Manager." Preston looked at it, really looked at it this time, the yellowed paper, the stains, the way the edges had gone soft from years of handling, and that seal, that rough, uneven smear of red across the back flap. Not wax, not the kind you pour from a candle. Something else, something that had been melted in a hurry, applied with a fingertip, left to harden in jungle heat. It looked crude, unprofessional. It looked poor. Preston's lip curled, just slightly, just enough. He reached for his pen, then stopped, changed his mind. His hand moved to the file holder on the corner of his desk. He pulled out a binder clip, black metal, spring-loaded. He opened it, slid the edge under the envelope, and pushed. Not a sweep, not a toss, just a deliberate slide across the polished wood. The envelope hit the edge of the desk, teetered, fell. It landed near Silas's boot. Face down, the red seal visible against the white marble. Preston didn't look at it. He looked at his computer screen. "I'm sorry," he said, not sorry. "There's nothing more I can do here." Silas stared at the envelope on the floor. Then he knelt. His knees cracked as they bent. His back protested. 75 years doesn't kneel easy. But he knelt. His fingers reached for the envelope. And that's when Preston moved. Not obvious, not violent, just a shift of weight, a step to the side. His shoe, black leather, polished to a mirror shine. The toe nudged the envelope. Just a tap, just enough to send it skittering across the floor. Under the chair, toward the wall. "Apologies," Preston said, his voice flat. "Let me clear this space. The CEO is arriving any moment for his quarterly walkthrough." He turned away, started straightening papers on his desk. Silas crawled forward. Not walked. Crawled. On his hands and knees on the cold marble floor of a bank where he'd once held an account, where his name was still in the system, where his dignity was being measured in inches. His fingers closed around the envelope, and then the door opened. The sound was distinct. The hydraulic hiss of tempered glass, the rush of outside air, footsteps, 2 sets, one confident, one careful. Silas looked up from the floor. A man stood in the doorway, 60 years old, tailored suit, charcoal gray with a faint pinstripe, the kind that cost more than most people made in a month. His hair was steel gray, combed back, his jaw strong, his posture perfect. He carried himself like a man who'd built something and didn't need to tell you what. Next to him, a younger woman, 20-something, tablet in hand, heels clicking on marble. Preston saw them. His face changed. The dismissive mask dropped, replaced by something eager, almost desperate. "Mr. Sterling," he said, too loud, too bright. "Welcome. I wasn't expecting you until this afternoon." But Sterling wasn't looking at Preston. He was looking at the floor, at the man on his knees, at the envelope in that man's hand, at the rough red seal pressed into 40-year-old wax. Sterling's face went pale. His briefcase slipped from his fingers, hit the floor with a dull thud. His assistant turned, started to speak, but Sterling didn't hear her. He was staring at that red mark, at that crude, desperate seal that shouldn't exist anymore. That should have been lost to time and memory and the jungle that tried to swallow it whole. His lips moved. No sound came out. Just a shape. A name, maybe. Or a prayer. His hand rose slowly to his chest, pressed flat against his heart. And he stood there, frozen, while the man on the floor looked up at him, and the bank held its breath. Preston scrambled out from behind his desk, moving with the frantic energy of a man watching his career disintegrate. "Mr. Sterling!" he stammered, rushing to position himself between the CEO and the beggar on the floor. "Please, ignore this. I've already alerted security. We are removing this disturbance immediately." He reached out, his hand hovering near Sterling's elbow, trying to steer the CEO toward the sanitized safety of the conference room. "If you'll just follow me, sir, we can—" Sterling didn't blink. He didn't look at Preston. He didn't hear the excuses. He walked straight through Preston's space as if the account manager were nothing more than a ghost in a cheap suit. Preston froze, his mouth open mid-sentence, his hand grasping at empty air. Sterling kept walking. The rhythmic click of his Italian leather shoes on the marble was the only sound in the cavernous lobby. He stopped directly in front of Silas. Silas was still on his hands and knees. He didn't retreat. He didn't apologize. He just held the envelope tight against his chest, shielding it. But Sterling wasn't looking at Silas's face. His eyes were locked on the back of the envelope, on the red grease pencil mark. Up close, the detail was undeniable. It wasn't a wax seal stamped by a signet ring. It was a crude, uneven smear of red grease, melted by a Zippo lighter in the pouring rain, pressed down by a thumb that was shaking from adrenaline. It was the mark of a forward observer, a mark that meant priority, a mark that meant life or death. The lobby was dead silent. Sterling's breath hitched. A sharp, ragged sound that echoed off the cold stone walls. That mark, his voice trembled. It wasn't the voice of a powerful CEO anymore. It was the voice of a young soldier who had been waiting 40 years to see that color again. "Where did you get that?" Silas looked up. His eyes were weary but clear. He opened his mouth to speak, to defend his right to be there. But he didn't get the chance. Sterling moved. He didn't call for help. He didn't check his watch. He lowered himself, slowly, reverently. His tailored charcoal suit trousers touched the dirty floor. The CEO of the bank went down on one knee, right there in the dust, level with the beggar. Sterling's hand closed gently around Silas's elbow. He lifted, not pulled, lifted, with both hands, with care, the way you help someone who deserves more than they've been given. Silas rose slowly, his knees protesting, his back stiff, but he rose, and when he was standing, Sterling didn't let go right away. He held on for a moment longer, making sure Silas was steady, making sure he was seen. Then Sterling stepped back. His right hand came up, slow, deliberate, palm flat, fingers together, edge of his hand touching his brow. A salute. Perfect form. Perfect stillness. The kind of salute you give when you mean every inch of it. The lobby went silent. Not the nervous silence from before, a different kind. The kind that happens when something sacred interrupts the ordinary. Silas's back straightened, his shoulders squared, his own hand rose. Slower, shakier, but just as deliberate, just as true. 2 men, 40 years apart, one gesture. Sterling held it. 5 seconds, 10. His eyes never leaving Silas's face. Then he lowered his hand, stepped back, turned to face the lobby, the woman in the gray blazer, the man at the teller window, the security guard, Preston, standing frozen by his desk, all of them watching, all of them waiting. Sterling's voice carried across the marble. Steady, clear. "This man," he said, gesturing to Silas, "is Sergeant Silas Grant of the 101st Airborne Division." He paused. "Let that settle. 40 years ago, my father served with him in Vietnam." Another pause. Sterling's hand moved to his jacket pocket. He pulled out a pair of reading glasses, put them on. Then he gently took the envelope from Silas's hand, held it up so the light caught the red seal. "This mark," he said, "this crude, imperfect seal. My father made this." His voice caught, just slightly. He cleared his throat. "He made it with a grease pencil, the kind they use to mark maps. He heated the tip with his Zippo lighter because he didn't have wax, because he was in a jungle, because he was bleeding." The lobby was so quiet you could hear the ventilation system humming. Sterling's eyes moved across the crowd, across the faces. Black, white, Asian, young, old. All of them listening now. "He wrote a letter," Sterling continued, "to his wife, to my mother, telling her he loved her, telling her that if he didn't make it home, it wasn't because he didn't fight." He looked down at the envelope. He sealed it with that red mark, and he gave it to Sergeant Grant. Told him to mail it if the worst happened. Sterling's jaw tightened. But the worst didn't happen. His voice grew quieter. "Because this man carried my father 10 miles through hostile territory, on his back, through mud and rain and sniper fire." He turned to look at Silas. "My father was 6'2", 200 pounds, and this man carried him like he weighed nothing, because that's what soldiers do." A woman near the back of the lobby had her hand over her mouth. An older man in a baseball cap stood straighter. Sterling kept talking. "My father told me the story 100 times before he died. He said the only reason he made it to that medevac was because Sergeant Grant refused to leave him. Refused to stop. Refused to believe that 10 miles was too far." He paused. "He said he owed this man everything." Sterling looked back at the crowd. "My father came home, built a life, built this bank, raised a family." His voice broke just slightly. "All because a man he barely knew decided he was worth saving." He turned back to Silas. "This man didn't do it for a medal. He didn't do it for recognition." Sterling's eyes were wet now. "He did it because that's what soldiers do. Because we leave no man behind." The silence stretched. Preston stood by his desk, his face pale, his hands at his sides, the sanitizer bottle still sitting on the counter where he'd left it. Sterling took a breath. This man kept this letter for 40 years. He never opened it. He never mailed it, because he didn't have to. He looked down at the envelope again. It was supposed to be a goodbye, but because he saved my father, it became a promise kept, a bond that time couldn't break. He lifted his head, his voice stronger now. This man walked into this bank today, asking for $800. Not for himself, for a fellow soldier, a brother who served this country. Sterling's eyes swept the room, and he was treated like trash. The words landed hard. Preston flinched. Sterling kept going. He was dismissed, humiliated, made to crawl on this floor while people laughed. His voice rose, not shouting, but firm. This man saved my father's life, which means he saved mine, which means he saved everything I have, everything this bank is. He turned to face Preston directly, and you made him beg. The lobby was so quiet, you could hear hearts breaking. Sterling looked back at Silas. His expression softened. "Sir," he said quietly, "I owe you more than I can ever repay." He paused. "But $800 is a start." Preston's voice cut through the silence. "Mr. Sterling." His words rushed out, fast, desperate. "I was just following policy. Our lending protocols required documentation. I couldn't just make exceptions for—" Sterling turned to face him. His expression didn't change. No anger, no shouting. Just stillness. The kind that's more frightening than rage. "Policy," Sterling repeated. The word hung in the air. Preston swallowed. "Yes, sir. Banking regulations, fiduciary responsibility. I was protecting the institutions—" "What's your father's name?" Preston stopped, blinked. "Sir? Your father. His full name." Preston's face went pale, just slightly, just enough to notice. "Colonel Hayes," he said, his voice quieter now. "Retired." Sterling's eyes narrowed. "Michael Hayes?" Preston's jaw tightened. He nodded once, a small movement. "The kind you make when you know something bad is coming." Sterling reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out his phone. "Mr. Sterling," Preston said, his voice cracking just slightly. "There's no need to involve—" But Sterling was already scrolling through his contacts. His thumb stopped. He looked at Preston. "Your father is a client of this bank," Sterling said. "A man I've known for 15 years. A man who built his life on discipline and honor." He paused. "Does he know what kind of man you've become?" Preston's hands started shaking. "Please, I can explain. I can—" Silas's voice cut in, quiet, steady. "Sir." Sterling turned. Silas was looking at him, not at Preston, at Sterling. "This isn't necessary," Silas said. "The boy made a mistake. He's young. He doesn't need—" "He made you crawl," Sterling said. His voice was calm. But there was steel underneath. "He kicked your hand while you were on your knees, on my floor, in my bank." Silas's jaw tightened. "I've survived worse." "That's not the point." Sterling held Silas's gaze. "You shouldn't have to." He turned back to Preston, tapped the screen. "Put it on speaker." The ringing filled the lobby. Preston's face had gone from pale to gray. His hands gripped the edge of his desk. "Please," he whispered. "Don't." But Sterling didn't move. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then a click. "Sterling!" The voice was deep, gravel rough, the kind of voice that had given orders for 30 years and expected them followed. "Colonel Hayes," Sterling said, his tone formal, respectful. "I apologize for the interruption." "No need. Is this about the quarterly review?" "No, sir. It's about your son." A pause. "Preston? Is he hurt?" "No, sir. but I'm standing in my bank with him right now, and I need to tell you something." The line went quiet, not waiting, bracing. "Go ahead." Sterling's voice stayed level, but every word was a hammer. "Your son just kicked the hand of a 75-year-old veteran, a man who saved my father's life in Vietnam, a man who carried him 10 miles through hostile territory." Silence. Sterling continued. "He did this while the man was on his knees, on the floor, crawling to pick up a letter your son had knocked down with a binder clip." More silence. 10 seconds. 15. The lobby was frozen. Preston's chest rose and fell in quick, shallow breaths. When the colonel's voice came back, it was quieter, colder. "Sterling, put him on the line." Sterling held the phone toward Preston. Preston didn't move, couldn't move. "Preston," Sterling said, "your father wants to speak to you." Preston's hand reached out. Trembling, he took the phone, held it close. "Dad," he said, his voice barely there. "Dad, I didn't know. I was just trying to—" "Did you touch him?" Not loud, not shouting, but the words cut like a blade. Preston's mouth opened, closed. I moved an envelope with my shoe. I was clearing space. The CEO was coming, and you put your foot on something that belonged to a veteran. I didn't know he was—" "While he was on his knees," Preston's voice cracked. "I thought he was homeless. You thought a man's dignity was worth less than a clean floor." Silence. "Answer me." Yes. I thought—" Preston couldn't finish. The colonel's voice dropped even lower. "What was it like?" "What?" "Watching a 75-year-old man crawl at your feet. What did it feel like?" Preston's face crumpled. "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like?" No answer. "What was it like?" "I don't know. I was following procedure. I was doing my job." The silence that followed was worse than shouting, worse than anything Preston had ever heard from his father. When the colonel spoke again, each word was deliberate, measured, final. "You shame the name, son." 4 words. That's all it took. Preston's knees buckled. He caught himself on the desk. The phone nearly slipped from his hand. "Dad, please, I can fix this. I can—" The line went dead. The dial tone echoed through the lobby. Preston stood there, staring at the screen, waiting for it to ring again, for his father to call back, for a chance to explain. But the screen stayed dark, and his father was gone. Sterling took the phone back, gently. Preston's hand fell to his side. His perfect tie suddenly looked too tight, his pressed shirt too starched, his polished shoes too bright. All of it like armor that had just failed. The woman in the gray blazer looked away. The man at the teller window studied his paperwork. Even the security guard turned toward the door. No one wanted to watch a man break. Silas stepped forward. Just one step. His voice was quiet. "Son." Preston looked up. His eyes were wet, red-rimmed. "I'm sorry," Preston whispered. "I'm so sorry." Silas didn't smile, didn't forgive. Not yet. But he nodded. Once. The kind of nod that says, "I hear you." And maybe someday that will matter. But not today. Preston turned to Sterling. "I'll resign," he said, his voice hollow. "Effective immediately." Sterling shook his head. "No." Preston blinked. "Sir? You don't get to run from this." Sterling's voice was firm. Not cruel, not kind, just true. "You stay. You face it. You earn your way back." He paused. "If you can." And for the first time in his 30 years, Preston Hayes understood what his father had tried to teach him. That respect isn't given. It's built. One hard choice at a time. And he'd just destroyed 30 years of building in 30 seconds. Sterling turned to his assistant. "Jennifer," he said, "call HR. Tell them I need a reassignment form drawn up immediately." She nodded, her fingers flying across her tablet. Sterling looked back at Preston. "You'll keep your employment," he said, "but not your position." Preston's head lifted, a flicker of hope in his red-rimmed eyes. "Thank you, sir. I know I don't deserve—" "You'll be reassigned to facilities management," Sterling continued. "Effective tomorrow morning. 6 months. Minimum." The hope died instantly. Preston stared. "Facilities management? Yes. You mean maintenance?" "I mean janitorial services," Sterling said, his voice unyielding. "You'll report to Luis Hernandez at 6 a.m. He'll provide your uniform and your assignment schedule." The lobby fell silent. Preston's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "Mr. Sterling," he said, his voice tight, fighting to keep control. "With all due respect, I have an MBA from Wharton. I've spent 5 years building a portfolio in high-yield assets. I am not qualified to—" "You're not qualified to manage people." Sterling cut him off. The words landed like a physical blow. "But you can learn to clean," Sterling continued. "Everyone can learn to clean. The question is whether you're willing to." Preston's jaw worked. His hands clenched at his sides. "This is humiliating. Yes, I'll be a laughingstock. Probably." Preston's voice rose, the panic breaking through his professional mask. "I don't scrub toilets, sir. I have a degree. I have credentials. It is beneath me." "Beneath you?" Silas spoke. His voice was quiet, rough like gravel. He didn't step forward. He just stood there, holding his ground. "I have a Purple Heart," Silas said. Preston turned to look at him. "I earned it in '68, Silas continued. "Took shrapnel in my leg, pulling 2 men out of a burning truck. They gave me a ceremony. Full honors." He pointed a scarred finger at the floor. 2 weeks later, I was cleaning latrines, burning waste with diesel fuel, because that's what the unit needed." Preston blinked, caught off guard. That's different. You were a soldier." "I was a sergeant," Silas corrected. "But the job needed doing, so I did it." Preston looked back at Sterling, pleading. "Sir, please. He doesn't understand corporate structure. My skills are—" "He understands service," Sterling interrupted, his voice sharp. "You understand entitlement?" Sterling took a step closer to Preston, looming over him. "You think scrubbing a floor makes you less than what you are? You think a mop takes away your education?" Preston didn't answer. He looked like a trapped animal. "I've known generals who made their own beds," Sterling said. "I've known men with more medals than you have degrees who still took out the trash." He paused, letting the silence weigh down on Preston. "Rank is what I gave you, Preston," Sterling said quietly. "Respect is what you earn." Preston flinched. "Right now, you have a title. You have letters after your name. But you don't have respect. Not from these people. Not from your father." Sterling gestured around the lobby. "And certainly not from yourself." Preston's throat worked. His jaw clenched, unclenched. "So what do I do?" he whispered. "You start over," Sterling said. "You put on that uniform, you pick up that mop, and you show us that you're more than just a suit." He paused. "Or you don't. You walk out that door. You resign. And you prove to your father that this is all you ever were." The silence that followed was absolute. Preston stood there, in his perfect suit, his perfect tie, his perfect shoes, and everything that had made him feel important an hour ago suddenly felt like a costume, something fragile, something that could be taken away. He looked at the door, then at the floor. He realized he had nowhere to go. 6 months? Preston asked, his voice hollow. Minimum, Sterling said. And if Luis tells me you missed a spot, you're done. Preston took a shaky breath. His hands were trembling. He nodded. Once, a stiff, jerky movement. I'll do it. Good. Sterling nodded to his assistant to file the paperwork. Then he looked back at Preston. One more thing. Preston looked up. You'll apologize, Sterling said. To Sergeant Grant. Right now. In front of everyone. Preston froze. His face went red, then pale. He turned to face Silas. This was the hardest part. Harder than the demotion. Harder than the phone call. His ego was fighting him every inch of the way. He looked at Silas's worn boots, at the frayed jacket. Preston started. The words stuck in his throat. He swallowed. Looked down. He forced it out, like pulling teeth. I'm sorry. It wasn't poetic. It wasn't eloquent. It sounded like it hurt. I shouldn't have judged you. He didn't look Silas in the eye. He looked at Silas's shoulder. It won't happen again. Silas watched him, silent, weighing. He didn't smile. He didn't offer a handshake. He didn't say, it's okay. Make sure it doesn't, Silas said, his voice flat. Then Silas turned to Sterling, dismissing Preston completely. Mr. Sterling, Silas said, the urgency returning to his voice. The apology is fine, but my friend is still dying in an alley. Sterling's face changed instantly. The disciplinarian was gone. The man of action returned. Luther, Sterling said, let's go. He turned to his assistant. Get the car around front, now. Sterling put a hand on Silas's shoulder. Lead the way, Sergeant. They moved toward the door, fast, purposeful, leaving Preston standing alone in the middle of the lobby, small, defeated, and just beginning to understand how long the road back actually was. The black sedan tore through the city streets. Not a standard bank car. A Maybach, heavy, armored. The kind of vehicle that insulates you from the world outside. But inside, the silence was heavy. Sterling sat in the back, leaning forward, his hand gripping the leather door handle. Silas sat next to him. The old sergeant looked out the window, watching the neighborhood change. Glass towers gave way to brick warehouses. Paved roads turned into cracked asphalt. The clean smell of the financial district was replaced by the scent of exhaust and damp cardboard. Turn here, Silas said. The driver hesitated. Sir, this is a one-way alley. It's not— Turn the car, Sterling ordered, his voice sharp. The driver spun the wheel. The luxury car squeezed into the narrow, trash-strewn alley. It looked like a spaceship landing on a different planet. Silas opened the door before the car fully stopped. Luther! He scrambled out, his boots splashing in a puddle. Sterling followed. He didn't wait for the driver to open his door. He stepped out into the mud in his Italian shoes. The alley was freezing. Shadows stretched long and dark. In the corner, huddled under a pile of damp blankets, a figure moved. A cough ripped through the air, wet, rattling. Cap? Silas knelt beside him. I'm back. I got it. Luther turned his head. His face was gray, his eyes sunken. Took you long enough? Luther wheezed. A faint smile touched his lips. Did you get the loan? Silas didn't answer. He looked at Sterling. Sterling was standing over them. He was staring at Luther, at the man shivering in the dirt, at the man who had once commanded a company, at the man who needed oxygen just to finish a sentence. Sterling signaled to his driver. Get the medical kit from the trunk and call St. Jude's Hospital. Tell Dr. Evans I'm coming in with a priority admission. Yes, sir. Sterling knelt down. He didn't care about the mud on his suit pants. He didn't care about the grime. He reached out and took Luther's cold hand. Luther blinked, trying to focus. Who's the suit, Silas? Silas adjusted the blanket around Luther's shoulders. This is the CEO, Luther, the man who runs the bank. Luther's eyes widened slightly. He looked at Sterling, then at the logo on Sterling's lapel pin. Sterling, Luther rasped. The kid? Sterling nodded, his throat tight. Yes, sir, I'm the kid. Luther let out a breath that sounded like a broken whistle. Your old man. He talked about you. Every night in the foxhole. Showed me your picture. You had a baseball cap. Too big for your head. Tears welled in Sterling's eyes. I still have that cap, Sterling whispered. Luther squeezed Sterling's hand. Weakly. He was a good man, son. A good soldier. I'm sorry I couldn't bring him home whole. You brought him home alive, Sterling said. That was enough. That was everything. The driver ran back with a portable oxygen tank from the emergency kit. He handed the mask to Sterling. Sterling placed it gently over Luther's face. Breathe, Captain, just breathe. The hiss of oxygen filled the alley. Luther took a deep drag. His chest rose. The tension in his face eased. Color began to return to his cheeks. Silas watched them. The CEO and the captain. The billionaire and the homeless man. Connected by a ghost from 40 years ago. Luther pulled the mask down for a second. He looked at Silas. That's the Sterling kid? Luther asked, his voice stronger now. The one you carried? Silas shook his head. He looked at Sterling, who was carefully wrapping a thermal blanket around Luther's legs. No, Silas said softly. He carried me here today, brother. Sterling looked up. Their eyes met. We're leaving no one behind, Sterling said. Not today. He stood up and lifted Luther into his arms, effortlessly, like a son carrying a father. Let's go home, Captain. 1 month later. The soup kitchen was loud, clinking spoons, scraping chairs, the low hum of 100 conversations bouncing off concrete walls. It smelled of vegetable stew and bleach. Behind the serving line, a man was working. He wasn't wearing a suit. He wore a gray t-shirt, stained with broth. A hairnet covered his head. He wore rubber gloves that went up to his elbows. His name was Preston. He looked different, tired. There were dark circles under his eyes. His face had lost that soft, indoor look. He held a ladle. Vegetable or beef? He asked. The man in front of him didn't answer. He was an old veteran wearing a faded Marine's cap. He looked at the soup. Then he looked at Preston. He recognized him. Everyone knew the story. The banker who made the sergeant crawl. The veteran picked up his tray. Not from him, the veteran muttered to the woman next to him. I ain't taking food from him. He slid his tray to the next station, leaving Preston standing there with a ladle full of soup. Preston didn't get angry. He didn't roll his eyes. He didn't cite policy. He just lowered the ladle, nodded. I understand, sir, Preston said quietly. He waited for the next person. Vegetable or beef? 10 minutes later, the rush slowed down. Preston took off his gloves. He grabbed a basket of bread rolls. He walked out into the dining area. He moved between the tables, clearing empty bowls, wiping spills. He didn't walk with that confident, clicking stride anymore. He walked like a man who was careful not to take up too much space. He stopped at a table near the back. 2 men were sitting there. One was Silas. He looked cleaner. His beard was trimmed. He was wearing a new jacket, flannel, warm, practical. Next to him was Luther. He was thin but sitting upright. A portable oxygen concentrator hummed quietly by his feet. They were eating stew. Preston placed the basket of bread on the table, gently. He didn't say anything. He didn't ask for forgiveness again. He knew words were cheap here. He just put the bread down. Silas looked up. He looked at Preston's hands. They were red from the hot water. The knuckles were chapped. There was a small cut on his thumb. Working hands. Silas looked at Preston's face. He saw the fatigue, but he also saw something else, humility. Preston waited, holding his breath. Silas didn't smile. He didn't offer a seat, but he reached out, took a roll from the basket, and he nodded. Once, firm. "Thank you," Silas said. Preston let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. "You're welcome, Sergeant." Preston turned and walked back to the kitchen, back to the sink, back to the dirty dishes waiting for him. Luther watched him go. He tore a piece of bread and dipped it in his stew. "That the banker kid?" Luther asked. Silas nodded. "That's him." Luther chewed slowly, thoughtful. "He's got a long road," Luther said. Silas looked at Preston's back, bent over the industrial sink, scrubbing a pot that was twice the size of his head. "Yeah," Silas said softly. He looked at Luther, at the oxygen machine, at the scars on his own hands, at the red grease pencil mark that is now framed in Sterling's office, but burned into his memory forever. "We all did, Luther," Silas said. "We all did." A close-up of Preston's hands under the running water, scrubbing a plate. The soap suds wash away the grease, revealing skin that is raw, red, but clean. A soldier's uniform may fade, but his honor never retires. If you believe that respect is earned and honor is forever, join our journey. Subscribe to JusticeSoul and help us tell the stories that matter.